Aloha and welcome to our last video on the animal kingdom. In this video we will talk about the vertebrates. So our goals for the video are to describe the main features to all vertebrates. We'll list the evolutionary history of the phylum Chordata. We'll go through and describe the features of the 8 vertebrate classes, and we'll list the features of human beings. So first up, let's talk about what makes a vertebrate a vertebrate. First of all, they have a skeleton inside their body, an endoskeleton. And we saw that with the echinoderms. The skeleton is going to be made of bone and cartilage in vertebrates. Cartilage is that soft material, kind of like what makes your ear its shape. Some invertebrates do have an internal skeleton, but it's not made of bone. So it's a little bit of a different kind of internal skeleton. Second, the vertebrates have a backbone, and a vertebra is a bone or a block of cartilage that makes up the backbone, and that's how we get the name vertebrates. And then third, the vertebrates all have a skull, and the skull surrounds and protects the brain. So we're going to see a little bit of a larger brain that's going to need that protection of a skull, and then that's going to run down into the backbone, and the backbone is going to protect like our spinal cord. Okay, one of the interesting things about the phylum Chordata and the vertebrates is that they have this evolutionary history that's tied into their development. So when you see the larvae and the zygotes starting to develop, they all go through this evolutionary history, and we can see 4 different things processed that are unique to the chordates. First up is they have this dorsal hollow nerve cord, and you can see it in blue over here on our drawing. And this dorsal hollow nerve cord eventually will separate out, and it'll form the brain and then the spinal cord. But all of them start off with this hollow nerve cord. Next up, we have this forming of a stiff notochord, and that's going to be this right here. And this kind of goes along the dorsal side, runs along the nerve cord there, and that kind of gives it a little bit of protection and a little bit of shape, or a little bit of structure. Third, the chordate embryos develop pharyngeal slits or opening in the sides of the pharynx. So they have these little like precursors to what we would call gills forming here. And then finally, fourth, all the chordate embryos have a tail that's going to extend out beyond where the anus is. So they all have this tail. So even us as chordates, as we're developing, we start off with a hollow nerve cord. We will have the notochord form. We have a little bit of a tail. We still have a remnant of it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the course. And then finally, we do have these pharyngeal slits as well. Within the vertebrate phyla, we have 8 different classes, and we're going to go through those real quickly here. As always, the lessons will go through them in a little more detail, but I just wanted to go through and real quickly show you what they're all about. The first one is actually a combination here. This is 2 different classes. This is the Myxini and the Spittomorphi. These are quite simply our lampreys and our hagfish. Now, they have a cartilaginous skeleton. They don't have any scales, and these are the jawless fishes, is what they're often referred to as. They breathe with gills, they live in the water, and they tend to be cold-blooded. So these guys here are kind of primordial, kind of ancestral. They're kind of a throwback as to what our first vertebrates kind of probably looked like. Next up are the fun guys. These are the chondrichthyes. These also have a skeleton of cartilage, but then these guys are going to have a little bit more to them. They'll have scales, and these scales are going to be almost tooth-like. They're called denticles because they're made of the same material as teeth. These do have a jaw. They have paired fins. They'll breathe with gills. They live in the water. This cold-blooded is kind of for most of them. Some of them we kind of think of as cool-blooded, which means they regulate their body temperature a little bit, but not to the same degree as warm-blooded. And our chondrichthyes includes our sharks, skates, and rays. And then finally, on our first slide here, we'll talk about are the osteichthyes, and these are the bony fishes. So they'll have a skeleton made of bones. They have bony scales, and they have jaws, paired fins again. They also use gills. They breathe in the water. Most of the osteichthyes have this special function called a swim bladder, and basically it's like a balloon inside their body that they can control the amount of gas inside, and that keeps them from being stuck on the bottom. So they can put a little more gas in, and that'll cause them to rise up towards the surface. They can take some out, and it'll take it down. It also keeps them oriented the right way. So if you ever have the chance to catch and clean a fish, if you open it up, you can find this little like swim bladder or an air bladder inside of them. Next up are the amphibians, the amphibia class. They also have a skeleton of bone. They have a moist or smooth skin, so they're tied to the water for the most part. They now breathe with lungs, or some of them can even breathe through their skin as adults. These ones here have a duality of life, kind of. Some of them, as a young, live in the water. They all do. And some adults have the ability to come out on land like a frog does. They'll have 4 legs, and their eggs lack a shell. So that ties them to having to return to the water to reproduce. And like we said, these are our frogs and our toads and our salamanders. Next up are the reptiles in the class Reptilia. These also have a bony skeleton, which we'll see in all of them, but the reptilians have a dry, scaly skin. So unlike the wet, moist skin of the amphibians, the reptiles can actually hold more moisture inside of them. They tend to have claws, they do have lungs, and they breathe with their lungs at all stages. They do have 4 legs, except for the snakes, which have degenerated those legs away. And then their eggs now have a shell, and that's kind of neat. They have a amniotic shell, which we see here, which is a bunch of layers, but because their eggs have this shell, they're able to lay them on land, and that'll hold the water inside of them. So now we have animals that can live their entire life on the land. Remember, the amphibians had to return to water for reproductive purposes to lay the eggs. The reptiles are able to lay them on land. Next up are the class Aves, or the birds, and as always they have this bony skeleton. Now these have a unique trait in feathers, and feathers are like a modified looking scale. And the feathers allow them to fly. They also provide a little bit of warmth, so they're able to keep some body warmth inside of them, and now we're starting to see warm-blooded animals. They also have an egg with a shell, so they're able to live their entire life on land. They breathe with lungs at all stages again, and these ones here will have wings which allow them to fly, beaks, and claws. So those are our birds. And finally we get to the class Mammalia, or the mammals, and that would be ours. They again have this bony skeleton, and now we get our unique traits for the mammals. The first is hair, so if it has hair, it has to be a mammal. And then they have their mammary glands, which is why we're called the mammals, and they produce milk. So the young are going to develop within the mother, but then they'll feed on this milk from the mammary glands. They also have lungs, and these ones are warm-blooded. The hair actually helps trap in some heat, so it works that way for them. And our mammals would be like us, and as well as the whales and such. Okay, finally we're going to talk about the features of humans. What makes us human? There's 2 features I want to focus on in the video, and they do the same in the lessons. One of them is going to be culture, and that's a body of knowledge that we're able to pass from one generation to the next. So that includes things like language and what we wear and manners and our sense of humor. All of these things focus into our culture, and we're able to pass that knowledge from one generation to the next. The other trait that separates us from the rest of the animal world is this nature of bipedalism, walking on 2 legs instead of our arms and legs, like the gorilla you see here doing. What this does is this is a result of a change in the pelvis and the change in the formation of the leg bones. We'll see some variations there as well. But the big difference comes here in the skull. And what it did is it got our skulls up a little bit higher. We changed the orientation a little bit, and we were able to use other things like tools. So we started to grow a larger brain, and we notice that up here. And that's one of the things that separates us from the rest of the animals. Okay, well that's it for the video. As always, good luck on the lessons, and we will see you in the next video.